It's Friday, June 24th. Let's talk PlayStation. Alright, we got a few things that I'd like to talk about, so immediately let's talk about some firmware, some very exciting stuff. PS4 got firmware 3.55. Doesn't really do a whole lot of anything other than improve the quality of the system performance. Awesome stuff there. We always love those updates. Alright, this next one's actually more interesting, but we'll actually see how many people remember this. This will actually prove some of the OG PlayStation people out there. Let's see if you've stuck around for remembering this. So Sony, just this past week, is coming close to closing a settlement, a court case settlement that they've been dealing with for a very long time. So when Sony released the original PlayStation 3, there was actually a feature in the firmware that allowed you to install another operating system onto the PlayStation 3. It was called Install Other OS. That was like an option you could do. And typically people would install Linux or something like that on their PlayStation 3. That was a thing you could do. And then in 2010, Sony actually removed the feature in a firmware update, and they got more or less sued and turned into a big lawsuit about how consumers were going to use that feature or something, and they're taking that feature away from people that originally bought a PlayStation 3 with that specific purpose of running another operating system on it. So they actually are getting close to a settlement here. It isn't approved just yet, but basically Sony is offering a certain way to sort of please the consumers that have been wronged in this situation. So actually what Sony is kind of closing in on is the offer of, if you owned a fat PlayStation 3 and you used Linux, or if you used in the other OS feature on that PlayStation 3, if you used it back then between 2006 and 2010, you're going to be getting a $55 refund. If you have a fat PlayStation 3 and you've never used the other OS feature, you're entitled to a $9 refund, and you actually do have to prove these things. You have to prove that you own a fat PlayStation 3 for the $9, and you have to prove that you owned a fat PlayStation 3 and use the other OS feature to get the $55, which is pretty absurd, and I'm wondering exactly how that is going to work once this actually gets, for example, approved, and everybody starts getting their emails and whatnot, or just the memo gets sent out online or whatever, and then the website's up for this refund or whatever. However this is going to work. But that is a very real thing that is happening, and it took a long time for it to actually get settled because this whole lawsuit started in 2010 when Sony removed the feature. Alright, so now with E3 over, a lot of developers are still talking about their games, so let's talk about a couple of things about Sony's games. So Sony Bend was talking about Days Gone this past week. They talked about how their game, they feel, is slightly more unique than most other games. Now, of course, the developer is going to say nice things about their games, but this one I found particularly interesting because I think a lot of people have Days Gone under their radar, and this game might surprise a lot of people because with a few of the things they're saying that the game has a lot of dynamic weather. They're basically saying that when you're playing this game, it could be 100 degrees, and then a few days later, the game can kind of change to a snowy atmosphere or something. A couple of people were watching the gameplay and saying, "Oh, it seems like this guy has 1,000 bullets on him because he keeps shooting and shooting and shooting." They're saying, well, of course, that's just for demo purposes, but when you actually are playing the real game, sources are going to be very constrained, and actual management of your resources and what you're doing when you're carrying with your character along with you and whatnot, that's going to play a major role in terms of how you can handle each situation, and you got to make use of what you can carry and what you can't carry. Your bike also can be damaged or has to be fixed, things like that. I mean, there's a whole lot of things going on, and it sounds very much so like a very survival-esque game, which of course makes sense because there's a shitload of zombies and everything everywhere, and it's open world, of course, too. So, and it's just there's so many on-screen enemies in this game, and if that's really what we're going to get when this game actually launches, I feel like this game is going to be very interesting, and it's definitely going to be one of those situations where a lot of people are going to undercut this game, and it's going to come out, and it's going to be a lot better than we think. And now moving on to Quantic Dream's Detroit Become Human, David Cage had a few things to say about that game, saying that it's going to take about 8 to 10 hours to actually finish the game, which is kind of more in line with most of their games, really. I mean, Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls didn't really take that long either. Those were about 8-hour games, especially if you kind of burn through them. But he said there's going to be a lot of replayability. Of course, something that he'd want to say because the game is about choice, and there's multiple choices and endings within his games. Again, kind of the norm here. But he's saying that this game has basically the most branching paths. A lot of choices you make in that game are going to be drastically different, and I think that's the one thing. If you watch their recent E3 trailer for Detroit Become Human, that they're really kind of trying to demonstrate that to you, which is that there are drastically different scenarios that this game can play out. And of course, that was just one scenario that they showed us in the gameplay. We already know there's going to be multiple characters, very much so Heavy Rain style. These characters are going to be able to die or keep living throughout the entire game, and whatever happens. The game's going to keep pressing forward no matter what you do. And that's great. I mean, if you have played, say Heavy Rain or Beyond Two Souls, you know that while the game does have drastically different endings, most of the time throughout the main game, you're still playing the same sections. So even though you're making different choices, a lot of the time it's all building up to the very ending where it can like kind of really branch off. So I'm hoping with Detroit Become Human, it'll be a situation where you can branch off pretty, say midway through the game or early on in the game, and you can have a drastically different experience from somebody else instead of just comparing your endings. And then we've got the new God of War. The games director Cory Barlog was talking about that, and he gave a few interesting details. The one thing being that this is going to be a single-player only game. So, of course, we know God of War Ascension back in 2013. That was the first God of War game with multiplayer. And I remember playing it back then for a little bit. It was certainly interesting, but I feel like it was one of those things where a lot of people experimented with it for maybe the first few weeks or something, and then of course it drastically dropped off. I'm assuming that's the case. I don't actually know this for a fact, but I would also have to assume many consumers definitely aren't begging for the multiplayer to come back. So he is saying that this God of War is going to be focused strictly on single player. He also says that this isn't going to be Kratos' last game. So the studio is pretty much immediately confirming that this Kratos is going to be in it for the long haul, at least for another game, at the bare minimum. But I think it was kind of obvious once we started to learn that this was still Kratos from the previous games, and this is a full-on continuous sequel, and it's the story is actually moving forward. Because of course, not to semi-spoiler alert for God of War 3, but when you finish God of War 3, it kind of ends in a way where a lot of people, it was up for debate for a lot of people if they could say continue this game, but now that we know that this is going to be still Kratos, it's kind of obvious that they probably want to keep doing something with Kratos, especially since he's now on, this is going to be the first real entry on PlayStation 4. And it's just, it's one of those long-running PlayStation IP. It's they're really going to stop doing God of War? Probably not. Now let's move on to PlayStation 4 NEO, the thing that we still don't have a real sort of announcement of. We just know that it's legit actually coming. So Shuhei Yoshida was talking about PlayStation 4 NEO. He more or less said, to reiterate with people, this isn't going to shorten PS4's life cycle. This is just a regular PlayStation 4. That's what he's more or less saying. PS4 NEO, the high-end PS4, is still PlayStation 4. It is not going to lower the PlayStation 4's current life cycle. And I think this is even more important that he has to say this, because especially with the announcement of Xbox Scorpio, I'm seeing a lot of people just straight up say, oh, this should just be a new generation. And some people are saying that this is just straight up a new generation. I don't know how people are, for some reason, fucking thinking that. But it's pretty damn obvious this is a completely new way that consoles are being approached. These are not new. This is not a new generation of consoles. This is still a PlayStation 4. Xbox Scorpio is probably still in some way, shape, or form going to be called Xbox One. Even if it's not called Xbox One, it's clearly still an Xbox One. It's going to be playing Xbox One games. The high-end PS4 is still going to play PS4 games. It's still going to have the dynamic menu. Everything's going to be the exact same, except it'll be a slightly more powerful box. The whole idea of this being a generational leap is definitely not the case this time. So that's more or less what he's saying here. He also confirmed that, well, he's not really confirming anything. He's confirming that they don't have anything to tell us just yet. He said there's no information to share, and when they do, they will share it. Which brings us into our next sort of side news story about this, which is that another source, multiple sources are claiming that PlayStation 4 NEO is still on track to release this year in 2016, which more or less keeps solidifying the kind of general idea around, and my sort of thinking as well, which is this console is probably still going to be releasing this year, and Sony's probably still pretty too far along with PS4 NEO to change it or do anything with it, which is what a lot of people were speculating about once Microsoft announced Xbox Scorpio, and they announced that it was coming holiday 2017, and that it was going to be vastly more powerful than the current rumored specs that we have for NEO right now. More or less, it seems like this is definitely going to be the case. This console is launching this year, and it is absolutely going to. The Sony's just too far along, so it's going to be released this year. And that's even more sort of a more solidified when you look at Andrew House's comments. What is it, just last week, regarding E3 and regarding PS4 NEO, where he's it seems like he was actually he was talking about Xbox Scorpio, where he's oh, I'm surprised they announced it that far out, because it seems like nowadays consumers really enjoy the whole instant gratification announcements that Apple usually makes when Apple says, oh, and it's available right now or something. So I think Sony's going to, take that approach. And since they are possibly going to take that approach, they have to have the console ready. And so that's what I'm saying. They are probably too far along to change this thing, and they're probably okay with that. They have a higher end PS4. They, will have a year lead ahead of Microsoft, and they're probably not even that concerned about what Microsoft's doing anymore. That's also what we kind of talked about in our E3 impressions video, which is that Sony and Microsoft seem to be less and less concerned with each other and more concerned about just doing their own thing and making sure that their consumers are happy and more importantly being happy with their own numbers, because as a business they're just going to be more concerned with turning profit and everything. They're not necessarily concerned with beating the competition. So it's just a matter of when we'll actually see this thing get announced. And if this thing's going to get announced around September or something, or get released in September or something, it kind of makes you wonder, it's not even a question of where they're going to announce this, maybe just when. I mean, I'm starting to think that Sony might be treating this thing so insignificant that they might just do a press release or something, or post it on the PlayStation blog, or just do one announcement video on YouTube or something. That'd be pretty insignificant. But I mean, there's not many other events they really have to finally show this thing off and make a big deal about it. Maybe they'll do it at Paris Games Week or Gamescom, whichever one they decide to do this year. I don't know, but it seems like they are definitely doing it for sure this year. Those are just some of the news stories I want to talk about with you guys this week. So the Running Gaming topic was about photorealistic games. Somebody asked me about photorealism in games and how developers keep pushing graphics to the absolute max. And he more or less said, well, when games get too good looking, or the power of consoles and PC is just pretty much infinite, will developers still keep doing that, or will they want to, say, do more artistically approached games or something like that? Very interesting conversation, actually. Go check that out. And then, of course, keep submitting topics, because I really, really need topics for online gaming if you have not noticed. And also, I believe let me check real quick, because I honestly don't even know off the top of my head. I believe the next part of God of War is going to be our last. My internet is really slow today. If you didn't get it already, my computer's over here. Yeah, so Monday is going to be the last part of God of War, which is awesome. We'll be starting our next Let's Play the following week after. And I believe I tell you guys what the next Let's Play is in the last part of God of War. So I guess I don't really have to announce it here, but because it's already decided. Sorry, there's going to be no vote for the next Let's Play. And that's pretty much it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I'll see you guys next Friday.